Oh, hi there. Oh, hi. It's Dusty from Vision Video, and you're listening to The Fright Lab.
Welcome to The Fright Lab. I'm Lucas Yoakum. With me tonight, as always, is co-host and producer and engineer extraordinaire, Joseph Wren. Joe, we've got something really special for our audience tonight, don't we?
It has never been as special as tonight is horrifying. We're going to talk about some very spooky vibes, my friend, with someone who is, shall we say, overqualified to tell you spooky stories, but looking so pretty while he does it.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are incredibly excited to say that tonight's guest, Dusty Gannon, vocalist, guitarist, friend to us all from Vision Video. So, we need to talk about Dusty Gannon for just a moment. So, Dusty Gannon, like I said, is the vocalist and guitarist for Vision Video. Vision Video, if you're not familiar, and why wouldn't you be? They're amazing. Their music blends the best of post-punk and goth rock with lyrics about personal tragedy, the human cost of war, and all of the potential heartbreaks in the modern world. But beneath all of this gloom beats a deeply human heart. Dusty Gannon brings so much kindness and understanding into his creations that he's kind of hilariously become everybody's goth dad, as well as a character he created called Goth Dad. If you know, you know. Dusty is also the 2024 Editor's Eyeball winner from Fangoria magazine, which around these parts is better than the Oscars, right? Unsurprisingly, Dusty is a big fan of horror movies, and he very graciously agreed to an extended interview with us, perfectly timed, I might add, for the Halloween season. So, get your makeup on and relax. It's time for an interview with Dusty Gannon. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lucas Yoakum. As always, but manning the ones and twos tonight is Joseph Wren. But tonight in the Fright Lab, we have an extra special guest, someone who I've been wanting to get on the show for a while, and we finally, the stars aligned in just the right way that we can make that happen. But more importantly, the stars aligned right around the time he just dropped a new fucking album. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Dusty Gannon, Vision Video, aka Goth Dad. Sir, how the hell you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well, thanks. Yeah, it's been a crazy day, as every release day, but especially album days are always just like a lot of frantic energy and running around and like making sure that everything is sort of firing on all cylinders. But it's actually been, knock on wood, so far it's been, essentially seamless. And the record's getting a really great reception from everybody, and I'm as happy as clams, if clams could be happy, I guess. I don't know.
How do you know they're not happy?
I guess they would have to tell you.
Exactly. That's my thought. Whenever you find a clam and it's opened up, people say that's a bad one. Don't eat it. I say that guy was so happy he just exhaled into the salt water and had just the best time possible. There must have been some good stuff in that water, much like this record, which I have been listening to all day. I have to say thank you to my wonderful co-host for saying, Joe, I need you to go listen to Vision Video right now. And I did. And I listened to all of it. And then the new record comes out. It's a really exciting day for me. I have a lot of questions about lack of distortion because I'm way in that headspace right now. But thank you so much for taking some time in this spooky season to talk to these guys about horror movies and whatever else comes up tonight.
Absolutely.
A little background to this interview for the audience. So I happened to catch Vision Video live here in St. Louis back in May, I guess. It sounds about right. When they were touring behind what was going to become their new album, as well as supporting, correct me if I'm wrong, Aurelio Voltaire, and you had Then Comes Silence with you, I believe. So you and I got a chance to chat a little bit backstage, and I tried to not bombard you with the typical fanboy questions, but I remembered this, I don't know if it was an interview or what the context was, where you had said you were a real fan of Italian horror, and fans of the show know that Italian horror, while I admire it, it is something that goes right over my head. So yeah, that's where we find ourselves now, is at this conversation, but I want to backtrack just a bit and kind of the obvious, let's knock it out of the park softball question. Do you remember like the first horror movie or the first horror movies that made you stand up and go, oh yeah, this is for me. This is what I want?
Yeah, actually I do. And it's funny enough, I actually talked to a friend about this last night. So how apropos. So the first horror movie that I think really that I saw that I remembered, like, now at my age of 38, like 30 years ago, I was 8 years old. My dad and my sister watched the film Pet Sematary, and I was not allowed to watch this for very obvious reasons. But they watched it in the living room, and my dad was like, "Sorry, buddy, you can't watch this one. You just got to hang out in your room. Your sister and I are going to watch this." So I like low crawled, like in, proper army style into the living room, and like a stealth ninja. Cause I really wanted, it's like you tell a kid, you can't watch it. They're going to want to see what's going on. So I remember watching it from underneath a sort of like table, like adjacent to the room, looking in and just being like horrified and just being so scared. And so shocked to my core, but also being just like absolutely gravitationally pulled in to not look away, and that was kind of the first big one for me. But there were a number of other ones kind of further down the line that I think had that same level of effect for me. Like for example, Night of the Living Dead. Both 68 and 91, or 1990 rather, I think. But those both movies, I saw them kind of around the same time because I like rented the original one, and then I saw like right next to it, oh, there's a remake. That's cool. And both are phenomenal movies for very different reasons. But I think there was something, even at a very young age, like around 12 or 13, watching those movies, I felt like, obviously George Romero is trying to say something that's not just like, oh, look at these zombies. Like there's some very deeply rooted commentary. And I thought that was really clever. And, knowing just like some basic information at that age about like the civil rights movement, and watching them kill the black protagonist at the end of that movie. Sorry, spoiler alert. I mean, if you haven't seen it, it's 1968. Come on. But,
it's been in the public domain for how long?
Yeah. There was no copyright on that movie. You could anyway.
You could literally pirate the movie right now exactly. And no one's going to say a word.
Nobody cares. But that was subversive to me, and that was really powerful. And I remember thinking like, wow, what a message. And I just found the storytelling elements of that really, really profound. But I grew up with like kind of 80s slashers and stuff, and just sort of that like that kind of heyday of, really, I think a lot of us in the horror world like really worship the 80s, even though there's a lot of like really terrible, shitty movies that are like just trash, but like there's some really phenomenal ones that became like comfort food for me, like the Nightmare on Elm Street series, the Friday the 13th, the Halloweens, like and I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of those films just made me feel at a very young age like I was a very weird kid, and it made me feel a little less weird because I was like, oh, like people are making this stuff, and this resonates with somebody. That's not just me. And that made me feel better about the world, I guess, in general.
Did anything post Texas Chainsaw Massacre give you the same good feelings? Because I have good feelings when I watch a good horror movie. Sometimes it's just the cheesiness. Sometimes it's the effects. Even when I watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Hills Have Eyes, one of those, it's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable movies. Even those, make me feel weird. That makes me feel like the weird kid. Do those films give you a similar feeling, or was it more of you mentioned the 80s, and that's the best way to say it, that kind of cartoony, schlocky vibe that only the 80s has been able to capture so far?
Yeah, I think horror is so diverse in its inherent nature. I mean, when you sort of just say horror movies, it's like, well, what does that really mean? I would argue there's the obvious end, which is, like Texas Chainsaw, Halloween, whatever. But I would argue, Children of Men is a horror movie. That's a scary fucking movie, man, because it's real. And it's like, being somebody that's like a war veteran, but you don't even have to be a war vet, but just seeing visceral humanity, unhinged and a collapsing civilization, that's scary. And I look at that movie as a horror film. So I think there's a lot of films that make me feel, that are under that large umbrella term of horror, that make me feel sort of good. And, I feel like a sense of, even if it's like murderous and bloody and gory, there's like levity, there's like Lost Boys, and there's, Dead Alive or whatever, stuff like that, Killer Clowns. But then there's also movies that I watch and I gain value from, and even if it's not a good time, like insofar as the subject matter, I feel fulfilled and I feel good walking away from the experience. And like one of those movies, for example, and this is like total heresy, especially since I am a huge Giallo and Italian horror film fan, is like the remake of Suspiria. I think is honestly kind of a little bit better of a movie than the original one. But, but I feel like the narrative in that movie is so well crafted and so interesting. And it's just, it's not as visually incredible. It has its moments, but like that movie to me is so well done. And it's not laden with a bunch of good feelings. You don't walk away from that movie going, yeah, things are all right. But like, I really gain an experience from watching that movie every time. And there's a lot of them that are like that for me, for sure.
You said something recently I want to say maybe it was an Instagram post, and I'm the sort of obsessive weirdo who will dig a person's social media to find an interesting point. You said something recently that's been kind of on my mind, and I'm glad you brought it up. And this is, quote, "Horror media mirrors actual horrors in our real world and helps us examine the real monsters that we contend with. And I think it's great that it's its greatest strength. Our world can be a little less scary because we understand it through intense storytelling that scares us to our bone, but makes us think critically about the world." And I love that you bring up an example of like I guess it was 2016 Suspiria. It's Luca Guadagnino. I only remember that because we did an episode on it. One of the things about it that's so, like, using that as the example, it's a rare movie in as much as the Berlin Wall is kind of a character in the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very much, it reminds me a lot of Possession with Isabella Adjani, where you always have just out of sight, you've always got the wall hanging right over you. And bringing that in, talking about this kind of those very uncomfortable subjects. I mean, the original Suspiria is not exactly a comfy, cozy watch for most people. I love it,
right.
But the remake is again, you use the word visceral, and I think you're absolutely right about that. There's a particular sequence, the dance witch sequence is what I like to call it. That made me just wince every time I watch it. Human bones aren't supposed to do that. It's very, very, the scene. Yeah. And for the audience, if you know. I do like that though. I like the idea that there's this kind of interesting, I winced when you said Killer Clowns, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about that movie, but I also kind of get why people have an affection for it. Yeah, it's a horror movie, but it is mostly a comedy. And there is a way that I don't know if it's maybe like stylized or formalized satire or something, where a thing is so horrific it's funny, where a thing is so over the top it's actually funny. what was I was just thinking Natural Born Killers by Oliver Stone is so over the top and so brutal and so pointed in its commentary. It's just actually kind of funny.
Right.
I don't know if that's like laughing through horror or what, but I don't know. I'm kind of curious where your head is on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think horror can have a really attuned sense of like levity involved, and even if it's not as extreme as like something like Killer Clowns, which is like super preposterous and like laughable, and it's very like purposefully so. And I think that's part of the sense of like fantastical ridiculousness of it. I'm sure is kind of probably messaging to some degree about like the times of the 80s, like where there was just this constant threat of like, you know, the Russians are going to send this weapon or do this to us. And it's like almost unbelievable, but then it's like, oh, it's actually is a threat. But, you know, I mean, but I think that I think the best horror films play with moments of like humor and levity to give contrast to the darker aspects of the films. You know, if it's just bleak terror the whole time, you sort of get like a little callous to it, like halfway through a movie. And so you need like a moment of like to take a breath and to have a laugh, and like, you know, having been a person in real horrible, awful things, like you do, there are funny things that happen in war zones and in awful fire scenes or awful shootings and stabbings. I mean, it's not the whole time laughter, but you know, like little moments of levity occur because we're humans and we have to like guard ourselves and find those things. I think that, you know, a lot of that just adds like a kind of a realism and a level of humanity to horror. But it has to be kind of tasteful, unless you are going the preposterous, like super comedic route. And I mean, most of the like really hokey horror stuff doesn't super land with me. There's only a few that I think use it really well. And I think, I mean, like when people say like your number one horror movie, what's your favorite? If you had your desert island horror movie, is for me, it's Return of the Living Dead, because it has everything that I love about horror. It's, you know, it's like really great special effects. It's zombies, which I'm a huge zombie nut. It's, you know, pretty intense at moments. It's actually pretty scary in a few scenes, and it's very overwhelming. You know, it's very claustrophobic, but it's also like pretty funny at times and genuinely so. And it's a horror movie with a bit of comedy in it. But I think most movies that are comedy movies with a little bit of horror get it kind of a little too wrong. And it's a balance, and that's a really tenuous balance. And that's like, if you can pull that off, that's a sign of a really good writer and director.
Yeah, I think a movie like Return of the Living Dead can absolutely beat you to death. I mean, if it weren't for, I think like just the roster of characters are so preposterous in their own right. There's one line in it that just kills me every time. Oh no, Trash is taking off her clothes again. Is there something about the delivery of the stuff? It's not even that funny of a line, but the delivery of the line is just, oh, God damn it, not again.
Wait a minute. This has happened before?
Yeah.
In a cemetery?
I mean,
with this soundtrack?
I just love that, like, all those characters in that film feel real and like lived in. And one of the things about that movie that I thought was really cool when I was like learning about it and just being a nerd and like digging into it was that, you know, a lot of those actors were like theater actors, especially the older guys. And they did like 3 table reads of that script. So it was like 2 or 3 table reads, you know, and a lot of horror movies, especially in the 80s, were like real fast production. It was like, get everybody together, slap that thing, let's go.
It's dirty and quick.
And I think that there is a really organic feel to the actors in that film. And it feels, like you said, it's like, oh, Trash taking her clothes off again. Like it's like, yeah, like he's tired of this shit, you know, and like Suicide, the guy, the big punk guy, you know, he's all pissed off because he's like, and you guys don't fucking get it. You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life, you know? And you get these like little windows of insight to these people without them having to like give you everything. So you get these little moments, and then like half of them die like pretty quick, and it's like, I mean, but I just love also the commentary. Again, I'm a big fan of like metaphor through horror, and I loved, that the military industrial complex, like failure to maintain control over this trioxin chemical, and like just this like the fact that some private medical corporation ended up with a couple canisters of this stuff. It's like, how clever is that? Because who the fuck knows? Like, there might be something like that out there that's just sitting in some basement somewhere.
And they're not even like a private medical corporation in the sense of we distribute insulin. They're like, we sell wheelchairs and crutches and some medical stuff. And every so often we get a cadaver and a tank of
half dog.
Yeah, half dog, things like that. I remember talking to a buddy of mine who was in the Army, and he was on a military airplane going somewhere. I don't remember what the conversation was, but he was talking to a paratrooper, and he said, like, how do you bring yourself to just jump out of planes? I mean, I'm willing to do some insane things, but that's too far for me. The paratrooper shrugged and told him, well, you got to remember this plane was built by the lowest bidder. And something about that comment, he was like, oh, and then all of a sudden I really was worried for the rest of my flight, but I understood why you could jump from a plane. And yeah, all right.
So is the parachute. Yeah, no, it's true. I was a paratrooper when I first joined the Army, and yeah, it's a very like real thought. You're like, yeah, somebody else packed this chute. I mean, I don't know how to do it, but somebody else did that, and this was made by some random company, so I guess I'm just gonna trust that this works, and then it does, and you're just like, oh, thank God. Like,
well, there are two categories of base jumper, right? Grand champion and stuff on a rock.
Right.
So going back to zombies for just a second, about a year ago, give or take, Fangoria helped you guys produce a music video for the new version of the song In My Side. And it is a short horror film in and of itself, kind of in the spirit of Return of the Living Dead and some of the more fun but exceedingly gruesome zombie films. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of that project? I've always wondered how that came about.
Yeah. So actually, all Fangoria really did was premiere it. So they weren't really involved up until it was all done. Because Phil Nobile Jr., the chief editor, was doing an article on us just generally, and he went to one of our shows and approached me, and via email he contacted me after the show like a month later, and he was like, hey, I was at your show in Philly, and I really enjoyed it. I found what you had to say amazing, and I love all the like references to horror and stuff, and he talked about the song Organized Murder, where I have a little sample of Tony Todd from the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead. But we decided we wanted to do, like you said, there's sort of a miniature horror movie. And throughout my time traveling around and doing touring stuff, I made friends with a variety of people, because I think like goth and post-punk sort of intersects heavily within the horror communities, just like metal and sort of alt rock in general, I think. But I met like Ryan Turek, who works, for Blumhouse. He's one of the executive producers for Blumhouse, and him and his wife Ciara have become really good friends of ours. I just like kind of hit him up one day and was like, hey man, I'm thinking about doing this music video that's essentially a small horror movie. So our original bass player's partner, Lindsay, basically came up with this very like small piece of an idea where she said, well, wouldn't it be cool if you guys did a video where there was like this witch and you're performing and she was like manipulating you? And that was kind of the original concept. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So Dan and I, the original bass player, we got together and we like fleshed out that concept that Lindsay had given us. And we basically made the storyline. We literally storyboarded it and me being like such a horror nut. And, when I was a kid, I wanted to make horror films. I learned special effects makeup from like, the Tom Savini books and like magazines and like looking at Fangoria stuff and just making stuff. And that's how I got good at doing makeup stuff in general. But, so, I've always had like a sense of love for cinematography and putting shots together. So we sort of storyboarded this concept of like, okay, well, there's this witch and we wrong her somehow, and she comes to the show to exact her revenge, and she starts slowly with like kind of fucking with us through like sort of like either a voodoo doll or like manipulating us through like some sort of metaphysical manipulation. But then she also turns the crowd into these like demonic zombies, and then they attack us, and it becomes sort of a zombie movie, and she's orchestrating it. And so we kind of came up with a more fleshed out concept. And then I called Ryan and I said, hey Ryan, like, do you know anybody that can do this? And he was like, I know exactly the right guy. And Elwood Quincy Walker Jr. was the guy to do that. And Elwood's like 20. He was 23, like, so he's like, I guess he's 24 now, which is crazy because he's so insanely talented. If you haven't seen his shorts, you need to go watch all of his short films because they're fucking terrifying and they're incredible. I watched this one, I can't remember the name of it. But there was one short in particular that I watched of his, and it's about this mortician working in a morgue, and he's prepping these bodies. And there's a very like intensely disgusting vibe that he's like, it's not like, it doesn't go over the line, but it skirts the line of like necrophilia. I mean, he essentially kisses this corpse at one point, and he's like sort of dolling her up and doting over her. And it's very, very creepy. The actor does such a good job. But this corpse reanimates and comes after him. And that's like the it's just a really short, but really, really tense, very well done short film. And I watched it and I was like, this is the guy. This is the guy. And so we got in touch with him and his cinematographer, and they came out, and he did a kind of a rewrite because, Elwood's just he's a prodigy. I mean, he's going to be like 10 years from now, he will be, one of the greats. He'll be making massive feature-length horror films that will be known probably forever. But anyway, he did a rewrite and put it into actual script format, and it was awesome. And we were like, this is perfect. So we got him. We shot the thing in 2 days. We started with my friend Lulu, who's one of the like top burlesque performers in the world. She came down up from Vermont, and she was our witch. And we shot, the first night was the intro sequence, and it took us about 8 hours. And it was very, very like marginal. And it was like, it was Elwood and I can't remember his friend and cinematographer's name right now off the top of my head, but it was the two of them operating the cameras, and we had the lighting, and we were kind of doing it guerrilla style. And then we got a couple hours of sleep, and then the next day we like hit the 40 Watt Club at 8 a.m. And there we had, so that was during the strikes. So we hired all these makeup effects artists that were out of Atlanta, because we have a huge film industry aspect here in Atlanta, or nearby in Atlanta. And we hired all these people that were working on stuff like The Walking Dead, like Haley Trefiro, and her whole crew. And, and they just came in and we shot for like 18 hours straight. And it was pretty brutal, but it was so much fun that it never felt like exhausting or daunting, because everybody was just like so excited. And you could really like even from the very beginning, there was a great energy, and you could really start to see it coalescing into this really special thing. Because we got all the big gags out of the way early, all the big, really gory gags were done. And then we brought in we literally played a small set, and we did a small show at the 40 Watt Club, which is like, it's one of the best venues in the world. It's here in Athens. But we had like 200 people show up, and we put on a small show. And then at the end of the show, I said, okay, if you want to be in this video, stand by. Everybody else, thank you for being here. Take care. I hope you enjoyed the free show. Have a good night. So, more than half the people stayed. So we sort of randomly selected about 30 people to be sort of demons. And then the rest were just concert goers. And it was just wild. It was just so much fun. And Elwood just shot and shot and shot and shot. And we literally got like effectively kicked out because they were like, all right, guys, it's like 3:30 in the morning. Like, and we were like, all right, I'm so sorry. Like we just got to get this one last little gag, and I mean, as those shoots seem to go, but, yeah. And, he just killed it. It really, when I had the image in my head when we were storyboarding it, cause I have a very like good imaginative, sort of photographic image in my head at that point of like how it was going to look and what it might manifest like. It was like frame for frame exactly how I thought it would hopefully be. And we made something out of like thin air, it felt like, and we made something that was so profoundly cool with such little resource, but it was because everybody was really passionate about it. And it was awesome. It was a fulfillment of a dream of me being, a teenager and being like, man, I want to make horror movies. And I got to be part of this machinery that made this really cool, small horror film.
I really enjoyed it too. That was what Lucas sent me to introduce me to Vision Video. And
oh, cool.
I love watching horror movies, films in general, TV shows too, but I do get into the technical side of it and trying to figure out, wow, that's a really cool thing. How did they do that? And the one thing that didn't happen that I was expecting was the witch to literally rip the layers of makeup off your face. I kept waiting for that to happen, like just piece by piece, it starts to fall apart. I mean, that doesn't work great for the character in the story, right? But I was waiting for it because that's how good it was. And it gave me, and this is all timing, I'm sure, but it gave me some memory into the Ghost video for Cerise, where it was like a high school band, but still Papa Emerita somehow. And I love that vibe because you can do anything at a club. If you're getting into the club and the band's performing, okay, how do I want to fuck with this situation? And just happens to be in this case, there's a witch and she's not happy with you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's further proof. I mean, the third Hellraiser film, which is, anyway.
You're not supposed to bring up the third Hellraiser film.
The CD thrower, man. That shit is great. That's the most 90s moment ever.
As I've said on the show before, rather like Herzog's feeling about the jungle, I enjoy it, but against my better instincts.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so what's going through your head at that moment, though, right? Like, it's done, you get done. Some months later or some undetermined amount of time later, it's done and you get to see the video for the first time. What goes through your head? Is it a moment of either fuck yes, that's amazing, or is it holy shit, we pulled it off?
Both, really. I mean, it was really like, when you make a music video too, because music videos, it's sort of bound by a somewhat of a format. Like you have to have, you like in my side video, and I mean, obviously there's an intro, but once the music starts, you've only got 3 minutes and some change to really tell that story. And we shot so much, like, and we ran out of time. I mean, there were things that we wanted to do that we had to kind of cut. Like when Dan, the bass player, gets kind of killed after he beats that zombie and the blood gag just like soaks him. He was supposed to get eviscerated, similar like Day of the Dead.
Oh yeah,
Captain Rhodes style. Like we had fake intestines ready and they were not left out in not real intestines left in a non-functioning refrigerator like that. But that was going to be a really intense gag. But I think there was also that major limitation of time. And I've like made a couple like really very low budget videos for us in the past. Like we did one for Comfort in the Grave, which is actually pretty fun because it's a big homage to Italian horror. when I was doing that, when we shot all this stuff similarly and we edited that, I realized, wow, there is no time in a music video. Like everything has to be purposeful and succinct, and every shot has to be like really cool, because you're only getting these little couple seconds here and there. And so, yeah, I mean, the first thought was like, wow, this is so high quality. This is so good. This is just how I imagined and how I wanted it to turn out, and even better. I mean, it surpassed my expectations. But then the other thing was just my appreciation for how much Elwood managed to stuff into that, like 3 minutes and so many seconds. He really did a good job at telling that story visually, because there's not a lot of story to get in the way of the plot. Like, it's very, here's the witch. She's turning them into zombie demons. They're attacking. Everybody's dead. Like, that's the story and the plot. So it's really succinct, but the movement through the club. And also, I think that what he did an amazing job at is showing the 40 Watt Club as a character. That place, you feel like, if you've seen that video, you've been there. Like, if you walk in there right now, you'll be like, yeah, I recognize this. Like, you go into the green rooms. Like, when we're running away off the stage, we go into the green rooms. That's, like fucking Nirvana was in there at one point, like all these legends were in that green room. It's a very, and that was something I wanted to really capture, was that place was Athens, was the coolness and the weirdness of Athens, Georgia, because our music scene is really prolific and important. And that club in particular is super important to me. I mean, we're doing like this weekend, we have our Southern Gothic Music Festival that Dan and I came up with. We did it last year. It was like one night last year. Now it's 2 nights. And it's just growing, but we do it at the 40 Watt because we love it, and it's a really important place. But yeah, so it was just one of those things that just went off without a hitch, and it was absolutely phenomenal.
So along the lines of how I erroneously started the question with Fangoria, rather recently, you won the Editor's Eyeball Award from Fangoria at their, I don't know how many years it's been running, the Chainsaw Awards, but you won the Editor's Eyeball Award. First of all, what is that? And second of all, Fangoria is a name that kind of looms large over the horror world, especially amongst horror nerds such as ourselves. Wait, he's breaking it out. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish this were a visual medium, but that fucking rules.
I can take a screenshot and hold that right there for a second.
Please do. It is a golden skull with a bulging eyeball and a chainsaw being driven through it by some unseen force. What is the Editor's Eyeball Award, and what's it like being now in the pantheon of Fangoria?
Yeah. So, Phil, who's become a friend of mine, ever since he did the article, I mean, Phil's one of those guys, like when he interviewed me for that article they did on us, it was just immediate chemistry, just immediately hit it off. It's like one of those guys or one of those people that it's like, man, I've been friends with you forever and I didn't know it, and we just talked I mean, we talked for like 3 hours on the phone, and it was wild. And we just talked about everything. We talked about horror. We talked about life. There was an interview, but it felt very organic, and it wasn't, I do a good number of interviews in it, and there was no like, what's your favorite record? I was like,
sure.
My favorite record, whatever, so he called me a couple months ago. I guess it was probably like sometime in the summer. And he was like, hey, just like, don't tell anybody, but, we're going to, Fangoria is going to give you this award. I was like, why? Like, my first reaction, I was like, huh? I was kind of confused. I'm not going to lie. But he was like, you champion horror, and you represent, like the essence of what makes it special in a lot of ways. And I'm sort of paraphrasing, obviously, but like, sure. He basically said, like, you trying to stand up for things that you believe in, and using dark imagery and horror imagery and literal, like, pieces of horror in your music, but also stuff like the video, and just like like everything I've ever done has had an element of like horror in it. And I think that goth music, just like I said, it sort of intersects and it has that sort of inherent macabre fascination with like darker proclivities. But the editor's eyeball award is like basically, as he explains it in the award ceremony, which you can watch on like Shudder. It's on streaming. I think it's on YouTube now as well. But it basically it's like looking forward to the future of horror and people that are doing things, I guess, that progress the ideas and the community and the scene in interesting and meaningful ways. And I mean, again, I'm not going to lie to you. While I am so incredibly honored, and I look at this literally in my hands right now, and I am so proud of this, and so still in a little bit of disbelief, because like I grew up buying Fango. Like I bought it like covertly, like so my parents didn't know at fucking Barnes and Noble. I mean, that's like one of the big reasons why I got into horror was they did a retrospective on The Beyond, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And there was this like very graphic cover of the teenage girl who's been plugged in the face with a 357 Magnum. And it's just this like caved in head. And I was like, what the fuck is that? And I just grabbed the magazine and I bought it unbeknownst to my mom. And it's kind of a funny story because like the guy at the checkout was like, are you allowed to buy this? And I was like, I don't know. And then he like rung it up and there was no age restriction or anything. So he's like, okay. And I like walked out, like I bought a book and I put it on top of the Fango. So my mom's like, what'd you get? I was like, oh, computer game magazine and a book. Cool. And she's like, all right, let's go home. So anyway, so having this is an honor and it's so surreal. But I also feel a little conflicted about it because I know for a fact that there are like thousands of people making really phenomenal short horror films for no budget. And they're scraping up change out of their couch to afford Cairo syrup to make fake blood. And they're begging, their parents to buy them a old mini DV camera or, all the shit I did when I was a kid. Or they're making real professional things on their own and things that are saying things about the world around us and saying really meaningful things that are much more deserving probably than I am. But that's not the way it all shook out. And so I look at it now so not to get like too emotional about it because it kind of chokes me up. I was watching live when they did the Chainsaw Awards on Shudder, and I was like, it renewed this sense of responsibility that I think it gave me a new sense of responsibility to make things, not just horror things, but just things in general, like music or anything that I create that tries to make things better and tries to build community and make people feel a little more included and a little bit more involved. Because I think that the one unifying thing that horror fans almost unanimously have is that we're all kind of fucking weird. And that we all grew up with a couple screws loose and we all felt like outcasts and we all felt disenfranchised for one extreme reason or another. And that there's a very, very big disparity in those experiences. So for me, it's like, I think that the feeling that I have when I look at this now is like, all right, cool. Now you got it. You got to keep earning it all the time. And that's huge. And like, to some people that might be ridiculous because it is a fucking skull with a chainsaw through it. But it's an entire milieu and legacy of people who do things that brought me to where I am now, saying you're doing something special and I have to earn that forever. So I love it. And it's, like I said, it's a total honor.
One of the themes that I noticed watching the music video was this soundtrack, post-punk, goth. It's very quiet compared to some of the horror soundtracks we've seen, especially lately. I think my favorite horror movies set a tone, or my favorite soundtracks set a tone where they're putting your mind where it needs to be to appreciate what's happening on screen and to not take it so seriously. Where do you think the sweet spot is in horror for somebody who's never seen it? On one end, you've got the campy, ridiculous Return of the Living Dead, great example. Nobody thinks that actually happened. Over here, you've got The Hills Have Eyes and exploitation films that go too far, even in my opinion. Yeah, I can sit here and endure it, but I'm not enjoying it like I would something else. Where's the sweet spot? Where do you think that a horror movie should be? And does it need to be loud to be scary? It's not always about jump scares, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I think it really just depends on what the point and the message of the film is. For me, I think there has to be sort of peaks and valleys to the intensity through whether it's like special effects or sound design. I like a film that has, like I said earlier, contrast. So that when you feel the fear and when you get the excitement of the lead up to the big gag or the monster or whatever, you've had time to build up to it, and then after it gives you a step away. It doesn't look too close, and it doesn't show the monster too much, and it doesn't expose everything, because I think one like sort of dogmatic thing that I do think applies to most horror is that if you show the monster too much, it becomes preposterous and not scary. Because ultimately we have to have this suspension of disbelief. So I think there's a really tasteful balance of really high intensity and then really like, even if it's just like gauzy, surreal dreaminess, but just like a little quiet moment away from that is where I find myself most gravitating. I think like looking back, like Pet Sematary does a really good job with that, because a lot of that movie is very gentle, but then it's like very viciously violent in very small moments, but it's super meaningful in its violence and in its horror, because the rest of the movie is just about mystery and the ambiance and the tension that builds and the sort of knowing that things are going wrong. But like Return of the Living Dead, or like our music video, it's like, it's bombast. It's like, it just goes and it goes and it goes and it goes. And it's like, it's a punk rock vibe, and I think that works just as well, just in a very different flavor. I think it really just aligns with what the director is intending to give the audience, whether it's something that's a little bit more cerebral and introspective or contemplative, or just, look at this. Look at these titties and intestines.
I recently,
and that's fine. Like either way, I'm happy.
I recently caught a showing of The Witch at a local micro theater, and it's weird being in a room full of people who have never seen that movie, because to me, it's kind of modern canon, right? But being in a room full of people who've never seen it, there's that moment very early in the film. It's the rabbit in the forest, and they're getting ready to shoot at it, and the matchlock musket blows back in his face. That's it. That's the whole scene. Yeah. Nothing's happening. There's no blood. All he got was sparks in his face. That's it. But there is something so fucking terrifying about that rabbit in that moment, in that shot. And really, when you watch the movie, there's all of about 9 minutes of actual really intense stuff happening. It's just that the movie is constantly tightening the screws around you until you're locked in. So when the final bill hook to the face happens, I don't want to spoil the ending of a movie most of my fans have seen, but when the final reveal occurs, it's oh shit. And listening to an audience respond to that for the first time was really eye-opening, because it is so intense and ugly, but also beautiful and thoughtful and artfully created. Watching that happen in real time is just so cool. And I also have the habit of going and seeing the same theaters, like Friday night, $3. We're going to throw some weird bullshit at you and see what you'll put up with. Those moments are great too, because one, I get that moment of watching something going, I spent money on this.
Exactly.
$3 American lost. But also, jokes aside, because I love these guys. But jokes aside, also a moment where you find those boundaries get reassessed for yourself. I mean, I recently rewatched Ichi the Killer, and it's one of those things that movie will find your nerve and push on it for 2 hours straight. And again, finding that place where a thing can be both artful and also disgusting and almost derogatory. That's the only word I can use to describe it. I'm interested in this thing that you've kind of touched on already, and I don't quite know how to phrase it. I've always kind of struggled with the words for this one. So I admit this is kind of like a big picture question, but in your opinion, what is it that connects people to quote unquote dark media? So be that goth music, heavy metal, industrial, horror films, giallo, whatever. What is it in a person that makes them gravitate towards that stuff?
I mean, I think there's like a, on the base level, there's our sort of connection to excitement. And I mean, these things are viscerally stimulating on a very basic level. It's like, oh, it's just scary, and I think people like to be thrilled. So there's that. And for some people, that's all there is, and that's fine. Like, I think everybody's consumption of whether it's horror or any sort of dark media, whatever your involvement or consumption, your means to the ends or whatever is totally valid. But I think on a higher, more cerebral level, I think, it's people looking at the world around them and understanding more complicated, really actually tough things in our real world through, dark or horrific metaphor in order to help us process these things. I mean, look at, Night of Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Romero was extremely huge championing the civil rights movement, and then and you obviously see that in that movie. But then in Dawn of the Dead, you get Savini, who's back from Vietnam, who couldn't be on the first film because he was a combat photographer, and you get this sort of extrapolation of American consumerism in the face of like ecological and maybe nuclear devastation. Like, we're all just blindly buying a bunch of shit we don't need, and we're convincing ourselves that things are fine, even though the world is literally falling apart around them. But as long as they're in that mall, they're okay. But if anybody comes and tries to take it, they're also willing to kill for it. I think that things like that, it might sound a little cliche, but I mean, I think it's absolutely true. It's like, it's like what you mentioned, that quote of me on social media earlier. It is a mirror. It's a way for us to look at ourselves and society at large and process things. But it makes things a little bit more palatable because we're able to consume these larger, more esoteric concepts in small ways. And maybe that doesn't make sea change. Obviously, I don't think any horror film has ever changed the world, and maybe it never will. But I think it can at least get people's gears turning, both in the head and the heart. And anything that makes you feel or think abstractly or even emotionally about big picture, actual bad, horrifying things in the world, without you losing your mind to fear, I think that's a good thing, because that reminds us that we can face these things and we can do something, and maybe we should think about this. I think it's just a natural inclination. I mean, horror. I think horror also just gets like super denigrated into being sort of a novelty genre, at least with film. And people are like, oh, it's a horror. I mean, look at every horror film rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Every horror movie ever is like rated terribly because people that rate horror movies are usually not like fans of the genre. And they don't understand that there's a lot of really incredible nuance and artistic expression happening that honestly, and a lot of times surpasses these like, massive award-winning mainstream films. So I just think it's like, it's just a super valid form of like, in a way, fear inoculation. You can expose yourself to controlled chaos and fear and walk away from it with insight, or at least either insight or maybe just like a good time. But either way, it's super valid and it's enjoyable.
And that good time is not always a bad thing. If you think about what you've been told or how you've been instructed to live your life, there is a point where people start to question that. And if you don't have the resources available, it might be the guy with his not so loud goth band wearing makeup that makes you stop and think, I'm not weird because there's more than one of me. And that's clearly a planned response to our present company, but it makes sense, I never decided that I wanted to play guitar like James Hetfield, and then I heard him play, and that became like my goal when it comes to how to, I don't sound like James Hetfield, but the way he approaches rhythm was something I stopped and spent more time thinking about. I wouldn't have started playing guitar if I heard somebody else play, and eventually I probably would have gravitated to that. So I think there's something to be said for, I know you haven't quite figured yourself out yet, and you're an easy example to say, well, have you tried this? It's not that bad. We're not doing anything crazy over here, And there's plenty of that. It's a different version of what we're being told today, I think. If you want to complain about social media, there's an easy complaint of overload of ideas and information and misinformation. There's also a lot easier contact with people or far further away than your geographic location of people that might think or like the same things you do. And horror movies are another thing in that bucket for me.
Right.
The people that show up to see the midnight show and spend $5, those are my people.
Yeah.
Well, it gives a lingua franca, right? You end up creating a common language that you and I before May had never been in the same room with each other. I'd listened to your albums, but that was it. But then you say the Beyond and I say, aha, yes, I understand. I have a tiny fragment of an understanding of this human being I just met, which, as someone who's worked in services before, have coming to understand people is incredibly difficult and not exactly smiled upon. Like, you made the point earlier about Dawn of the Dead. Be a dumb consumer and don't question too much and you'll get along just fine. Well, if you want to be next to your fellow man, you got to ask questions. And I think that's an interesting thing is the connectivity of it. You were saying that, horror movies are always kind of frowned upon on some level. In the last few years, I think it's gotten a little better. The quote unquote elevated horror thing, which I have literally spent hours talking about and don't need to waste more of my life talking about.
I've already edited this conversation, sir.
Yes, I know. I won't put you through that again.
He will eventually. I know he will.
It will happen again. I'm lying. But I think, storytelling is one of humankind's oldest interests, oldest professions, oldest pastimes. And ghost stories are literally as old as human writing. I mean, I think the oldest one goes back to ancient Babylon or ancient Egypt. I feel like sharing a scare, for lack of a better term, I don't like to alliterate, but sharing a scare is a very powerful thing to do. And when you're in the theater with people seeing The Witch for the first time, you have a little vicarious moment of going, oh, yeah, I remember when this scene made me fly out of my chair. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's a communal experience, and I think the impact of that is dramatically understated in society. And like I said, I just think that like horror and dark media, as you mentioned, it's just as valid as any other like art form, in my opinion.
So kind of winding back from the big brain ideas that I like to think I have. So today, new Vision Video album comes out, Modern Horror. First of all, holy shit, what a good album. But I have to fanboy for just a second here. So how was the recording and production of this album different than previous albums. Like, there's a real sonic difference that I picked up on almost immediately. It has a very, compared to Self-Titled, which is very tense, very claustrophobic feeling as an album. This album feels bigger, and I don't want to say, oh, it sounds like it was recorded in a bigger room, but it has a bigger breathing feeling to it. Okay, what were your decisions going into that production?
So our first two records are recorded with our dear friend Tom Ashton, who's in the amazing integral goth band the March Violets from the 80s, and now they're putting out. I mean, they just put out a new record that's absolutely phenomenal. Go check that record out; you will be blown away. We recorded with Tom. Tom runs Sub Von Studios from his home. He has a really nice studio at home. There are like definitely limitations. It was more temporal. Like we just had like less time back then because we were all working like normal quote unquote jobs. Whereas now we're doing this full time. We've been doing this full time for like 2 years now. Basically, Tom made a lot of really very cool and much loved sonic choices in the treatment of that record. And because I kind of approached both of those records and I told Tom, I was like, hey, let's make this sound like 1982. I want this to sound a little gritty and like, I wanted it to have that same body feel of most of the songs as something you had heard in the 80s. Because I just like something about that just nails a sense of what scratches my brain and my favorite music that I grew up loving.
Well done, by the way.
When we went, I mean, and that's all. Like we just played the songs. Tom really did an incredible job at like crafting and making so much kind of eerie mystery in those songs in those first two records. But with this new one, we decided to go with the producer Ben Allen, he's a Grammy Award winning producer in Atlanta. He runs Maze Studios where we recorded it. And Ben is a producer that's done such a huge diversity of music. It's wild. Like he won a Grammy by doing that song Crazy by Gnarls Barkley in the early 2000s.
Oh, okay. But yeah.
He's worked with Christina Aguilera, but he's also worked with like Erasure and Deer Hunter and, like all these, like he did Animal Collective and like all these, like a lot of it's like indie in the early 2000 teens. But, just like when you read his discography, it's like, wow, this guy has done so much, but it doesn't really matter. Like genre to me matters less than capability. Like somebody that's like, oh, I've made these records. So when we started talking to Ben, it was like, we kind of got together with him and, Dan, our original bass player, Dan's no longer in the band. He left to focus on, like, he's a professor at the University of Georgia. And he's like now a department head. So he was like, I really just don't have time. And he could, he wasn't able to tour and stuff like that. So Dan stepped away. But before that happened, like Dan met Ben like a long time ago. And we just sort of cold called him and we're like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but we've met once before. We like your production style. It's just super well produced. We'd like to come talk to you. So we met up with Ben. We had this like super cool conversation for a couple hours. And a lot of it was just honestly about Athens, like and our love for Athens, Georgia and how cool of a town it is here. But we got into the music talk and it was very clear that he knew exactly like what we were kind of going for. Vision Video is a band that, I have always really loved music that has dark, sort of gothy, under or overtones, also like music that has a bit of accessibility that draws you in and is catchy and hooky. I'm a big Cure fan and the Chameleons and Joy Division, the Smiths and all those bands had really, they were dark and brooding and foreboding, but they had like pop sensibility to them. And that's like why they became so big, was because people fell in love with those songs. So I think it's just something that comes out when I write a lot of riffs. I like to write little hooky, little catchy riffs. And also I'm just like a fake guitar player. I don't actually know what the fuck I'm doing. So like, I just like, I put my hands on the guitar until something cool comes out and I'm like, okay, that sounds good. And I just replicate it like a million times. So like meeting with Ben, he like totally understood it. He showed that he understood it. And when we got into the studio, it was amazing because he's like he is a master at what he does. And I have a thing, like, I love watching people that are the top of their game doing anything. I just think it's fascinating to watch an expert do whatever they're an expert at. And just working with him and just like listening to like how he talked about building layers of sound and building moments within the songs by manipulating just small effects here and there, or, you know, adding a couple notes here and there. It was truly a learning experience, but also just a brilliant, like, I almost felt like vicarious to my own experience sometimes, like just watching him make decisions and present those decisions to us and be like, hey, what do you guys think about this? Like, let's try this. He's like, there was a lot of time in this studio where he'd be like, just humor me. Like go do this real quick. And I'd be like, okay. And I'd do it and we would layer it in and be like, holy shit, that's awesome. And it's something I never would have thought of, but I learned a lot. But you know, this record, it's kind of a tonal shift. Also, there's a lot heavier stuff in this record than the first two. You know, I think some of that is because I have had a lot of frustration and anger looking around at the world. And I think it's just coming out with what I'm writing and the way that I'm playing, and just like wanting things to be a little bit more aggressive and intense. But you know, I also just, I was like, I want to go into less like pop orientated spheres of music with this band, or with anything I do musically. So I was like, let's make this kind of an embarkation moment to where we're going. And I think it's to use one of the song titles, a sign of the times. It's like it's a direction that we're moving towards. And I don't think that we're ever going to be like, we're not going to be The Wake or like some intensely like almost metal-esque goth band, or whatever you want to call what we do. But I want there to be a rawness and I want to start exploring stuff that I haven't done, because we've done the kind of catchy hooky stuff, and that's fun, and I love those records. I love the first two albums a lot. But I'm really, right now, my brain is like let's kick people in the teeth with reality. And I think there needs to be a little bit more visceral nature to the music. But that also really lined up with the like horror, the modern horror theme of the record, with just making people feel a little uneasy, a little less like, oh, this is more like safe, or like less mystery, a little more visceral, was what we were going for with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, not that you produced like a Spawn Ranch album, but there's definitely an element of, it's almost a little more industrial. Yes, I just referenced Spawn Ranch, and I refuse to apologize.
That's a great. I loved it. I loved them when like early 2000s. That was my jam.
So there's a little bit of an industrial feel to the album. It's very, again, spacious and weird. The word I kept coming back to, as I was listening to it earlier today, threatening. There's a very threatening element to it, and not that. I've seen you guys play live. We've been having a lovely conversation, I think. I don't think you're a threatening human being, but when you're singing about the things you're singing about, it is hard to not be very brutal about it. I mean, the chorus of Dead Gods is, it's a gut punch and it's ugly, but the part of me that is also a guy who spent time listening to a band like Spawn Ranch is like, fuck yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. So, I do like that, though. I mean, your guys' output, Haunted Hours compared to Self-Titled, it's still a goth album. It is a slightly bigger sounding goth album, but it's still a goth album. There's a lot less personally confessional lyrics is the thing that I was picking up on most obviously. It is a much more socio-political kind of album, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, I think for me right now, my interest in art and the output of the art is change, because we have to change things right now. Like, the way that this shit is working is untenable. And I think looking at this election cycle and, ecological catastrophes that are happening because scientifically speaking, like the fucking oceans are boiling. Like they're like we're losing the world. We're losing a lot of ground to things that were preventable. But also we're losing social ground to division and polarization. And I just, I feel like we're at this like very shifting breaking point. It's either going to be a time in history where we look back and go, that was when everything changed for the better, or the opposite, where we lost it all because we couldn't be civil and we couldn't make decisions to talk to each other, and we allowed cult of personality and religion and all these other things that beguile fear to make fear even worse, and use fear as a weapon to convince people to do horrible shit. And I'm actually very optimistic. I find myself talking to a lot of people, especially in like sort of leftist or progressive circles right now, and I'm like, I'm pretty optimistic. Like I feel like we're going to, we're starting to see the cracks in the wall. And we understand that the foundation is going to crumble if we don't do something. And a lot of people that I talk to are like, "Oh, I don't know. I'm glad you feel that way." But I think that it requires diligence and it requires attention. And I think that that's like one thing that art always has done really well is it makes us, feel vigor to make change or to think about things. Or at least be somewhat involved in what's going on around us. And I hope, again, I think that Vision Video's modern horror is going to suddenly make somebody go, I've got the idea that's going to fix it all. No, of course not. Like that's not going to happen. But I think everything is all about tiny incremental progressive change. And there has to be people that hear things through music and see things through film or television or video games or whatever, or books, or podcasts, and that activates their brain where they go, oh yeah, it's not all lost. And we can do things, and we have to give a shit, and we have to give a shit just a little bit more. Because if everybody starts giving a shit a little bit more and just tries a little bit harder to be a little more understanding, a little more civil, a little more willing to not just make concession, but just like communicate and understand where people come from that are not like you and not hearing the same shit that you hear in your echo chamber every day. When that all collectively starts to actually happen, then we will see things change. But the anger and the vitriol and the like bitterness that you're hearing in this record is because there are things. And I won't go I'm not going to go too deep down the rabbit hole of this, but there are things and people and organizations that are so based in cult of personality that it blinds people from logic, fact, and reason. And they're willing to just give everything to these people. And that's fucking scary. That's where awful, awful atrocities start happening. And so I see this as existential. So I'm putting that boot in the face of that.
It's so interesting you put it that way, the whole cult of personality thing. I once heard someone say that you can't rationalize someone out of something they didn't rationally get themselves into. And I've always struggled with people who talk about like, well, any rational person wouldn't do insert whatever thing. And the thing I always come back to with that, and this is admittedly me being kind of a cynic, is going, when have you ever met a rational person?
It's like the common sense argument. Well, common sense, stop right there.
Not that fucking common.
Let's step back and you try to explain that opinion again, please.
Listen, I am no like moral paragon. I am just as guilty of this as anybody else. I have absolutely made decisions against my best interest, knowing what I was doing. Right. People do that. And I think that's like, I'm willing to forgive people of that personally. Like, listen, we all make fucked up, weird decisions sometimes. It is unavoidable. It's, human condition stuff as far as I can tell.
Right.
But when people don't take a step back and look at it and go, oh, wait a minute, hold on. What am I doing here exactly? Why am I thinking this? I mean, I'm sure we've all had that. I mean, you've even talked a little bit about this in the current album, that moment where you're listening to an irrational voice in your head and you have to stop and go, I know better than this. Yeah. I know better than this. This doesn't have to be this way. And that's one of the things that, you know, we've been talking now for like an hour and 45 minutes or something. I can't quite tell. You know, one of the things I really appreciate about Vision Video as a band, though, is very much the human element of it. Even beneath the fury and the very reasonable bitterness of many of the subjects of your songs, there's still kind of a human heart underneath all of that stuff. And what do you think the key is there? How do you keep that? I mean, you know, fans of Vision Video don't need me to tell them the mythos of the band, but you know, Dusty is a combat veteran who was also a paramedic during COVID. Needless to say, saw some shit. And I think anybody who's lived longer than 9 minutes has had some trauma occur to them. I mean, we've all been there. We've all had some fucked up thing that we're still wounded by on some level.
Right.
How do you keep that? Like, what for you, what's the key to, despite how ugly and dark shit is and the subject matter you're dealing with is, how do you keep that human heart beating underneath it? Not give in to the witch who's turning everyone into demon zombies, either metaphorically or quite literally.
Right. I mean, I think that it's, you know, I mean, I think there's a resilience to all people, whether you know it or not. And I've been really fortunate. There's a lot of things like in the military especially that like, I really wish that I didn't have in my brain that they installed, right? Like there's a lot of toxic shit that I've spent years getting rid of. A lot of toxic masculinity, a lot of things like, you know, when I get hurt, you will not hear me say a fucking word about it because I was raised in that environment of, oh, you're injured. Are you really? Can you hack it? Okay, ruck up, move on, because we got a war to fight. That's toxic. That's stupid. I have 0% disability rating from 15 years in the military because I never said a fucking word about it. That's stupid. I should be getting paid. My back is fucking destroyed. My knees are toast. I am in pain like 90% of the time on some level. That's stupid. That's toxic. But for all that awful shit and like PTSD and like all these other things, one thing that I did learn the military and the fire department through training but also going through, you know, intense experiences was you will survive things you didn't think were imaginable, and you'll experience things that you're like, how am I gonna deal with this? You know, like I've seen some shit, but no, but I mean literally, you know, like I've experienced a lot of awful things. A lot. I could spend days telling you line by line calls that I ran the fire department that would just shock you. Yeah. But there's only like really a core group of them that really got me. I mean, it's always like any bad thing's bad, but there's, you know, a baker's dozen of them that will haunt you. And every day I think about all these things every day. There's something, little context thing that just triggers a memory. And then I'm smelling burning flesh, or I can smell blood in the air, or whatever. Yeah. You know, or I can hear people screaming for just a second. You know, it's never like or very rarely is it a long thing. But even when you're in those moments, before you even get to that, like years down the line, where those things are coming and hitting you every day. When you're in the moment of those little things, you're aware. You're like, man, I'm never going to forget this. And it might be as simple as that, or it might be as bad as like, oh, this changes everything. Yeah. You know, and that sucks. What I've learned from these experiences is that you can be okay, but it takes effort, right? Like you're not just going to like wake up, like you're not going to sleep or drink or fuck or drug or exercise your way out of any of these things, right? Like you have to take an active effort. I say this at all of our shows. You have to take an active effort to get better. And getting better isn't a goalpost. It's okay, I learned to survive and now I just survive, but I have the tools to know how to deal with this, right? So like, I think that's for me, like the fact that I am still here to me is shocking sometimes, not to be like, oh, I'm so wounded, but like,
Yeah.
I'm lucky. And a lot of it's circumstantial. A lot of it's like, my partner Scarlett, my parents, my sister, like my friends, my cats, like there were things like that kept me here when I was done. And I have been in that place, like not just once or twice, but many times. And it's something that I'm aware of now, and I know it. So it's like, all right, my choices are die and destroy so many people's lives that love me and care for me, and wound them even worse than what I'm probably feeling for the rest of their existence. Or I can take that, even some of that toxic shit, and say, you know what? Ruck up, do the fucking hard thing, go talk to somebody, go do the thing. You need to work, get to a point where you can survive. And I think that's the kind of beating heart of that small aftertaste of positivity and hope in a lot of our songs that I want there to be. Like, I don't want it to just be darkness, because you hear music that's just abjectly dark, and I'm like, well, what's the fucking point, man? Like, I need to have something. But that's just for me. And I want people to understand that there is a duality to this modern horror that we're watching unfold in front of us right now. And that feeling that most people have right now of, this is fucked up. Like, everything that's going on right now is fucked up, and we have no control over it. Yes, that's true. We're not individually going to control anything that happens in the next couple months or the next couple years, whatever. But you can control like how you mitigate what happens around you and how you allow it to manifest within yourself. And you have to maintain at least a small sense of like, I can do this. I can make it, and I can survive. And I think that a lot of horror movies do that too, right? Like, there's the final girl, and she's the one that has that sense of like, she's just smart enough, or he's just smart enough, or whatever, they're just capable enough to get through the unimaginable thing. So I think there's maybe a parallel there somewhere in there as well.
I cracked the joke in one of our episodes, on the episode we did about It Follows, where mysteriously the thing that saves a group of kids, like a group of 20-year-olds from some eldritch entity that is passed along through sex, the thing that saves them is them sticking together.
Yeah.
Sticking together, coming to, like, the hero is doing everything she can to just be like, get away from me because I'm going to die. And they all say, no, we will not let you drown. You're going to be fine. But we've got to all do this all together. That little glimmer of hope, that little beating heart at the end, it by itself is not enough to turn the tide. But if you throw it in a room with a lot of people all doing the same thing, mysteriously, that drop becomes a tidal wave.
Right. Absolutely.
I genuinely do not know where to take an interview after that section. Holy shit. Wow. New heights reached here tonight.
Well done, sir.
Hell yeah.
Well, I've got an idea where to take it.
Okay.
I have this thing that I like to do on all of my podcasts where, I seek the final thought, or I seek the final idea that tries to wrap up, all of the fun and all the great conversation we've been having tonight. This record sounds great. I don't know if there's a place you want people to go buy it, but I can recommend Bandcamp, and I encourage everybody to go pick that up right now in lossless flack.
Yeah.
Because I just did while we were talking.
Well, thanks, man. No, yeah. So we're like totally independent other than booking. That's the only thing that we outsource at this point. And I like being an independent band because it's limitless to our decision making. So really, I was literally today at the vinyl plant, and I got to press a vinyl record at Echo Base, which was cool. We have a couple variants. We have a really cool variant that's like it's neon green, like the old horror sticker on the VHS cassettes.
Hell yes.
With purple splatter. We've got a red and black splatter and an orange and black splatter. Those are getting pressed like literally this week and into early next week, and will be available. And we sell those direct. So all that comes from our website, which is just simply visionvideoband.com. Yeah, if you like digital, Bandcamp is great. We don't really sell any merch from there because all of our like merch and records and stuff come from our website. But we do the digital sales, and we're selling the record for $5 or whatever you want to pay for it. And you get lossless, great, extremely high quality. Yeah, I mean, but a lot of artists are real super turned off by Spotify, and yes, they are the fucking like evil corporation. Like they absolutely take advantage of artists, but it is what it is. And I'm a user of Spotify, but I take it with a grain of salt. It's like I think that it's like one of those things where it's a tool rather than like, I try not to consume music through Spotify. I try to listen to vinyl and Bandcamp. I try to support artists. If I'm going to listen to something on Spotify, I'm going to buy something from that artist if I'm listening to it regularly, because I do not want to give Spotify all the money. I'd like to give that artist their just due. But there, there's balance, and these are big picture things that we can't affect in and of ourselves. But oh yeah, we're on every streaming platform. We're on YouTube. We're on Amazon. We're on Tidal, Spotify, blah 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 blah. Yeah. So really, wherever you like, however you like to listen to music, you can find us very easily, and we appreciate any form of patronage, whether it's Spotify or buying a vinyl record.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, it's Friday night. Someone in their glorious wisdom decided to give the Fright Lab and Vision Video the opportunity to, I don't know, set up a double feature of horror movies at midnight. I want to ask the two of you, we've got 2 movies to show. There might be beer at the concession stand. There's definitely popcorn. I know there's candy, but it's midnight, and we have to show 2 films that will give someone a different perspective about horror. I'm going to start with you, Dusty. What's the movie that Vision Video wants everybody to see?
Different perspective of horror. Damn, that's a good question. Like trying to dig into.
You've seen Psycho. You've seen The Exorcist. Yeah. We're going to show you something different.
Okay. As it turns out, I'm really bad at listing things. Every time somebody's like, can you name like 3 of your favorite? I'm like, fuck, dude, I have to list anything. And apparently even one thing is hard. Let me think on this. Different perspective of horror. And this is like the moment where I always wish I could just like run into the other room and like just scour through my physical media collection and be
take your time. Yeah, cool. I'll be here all night.
Different perspective of horror. Possessor by Brandon Cronenberg.
Possessor. Okay, yeah. I just watched that for the first time a few weeks ago. Fuck yes, that is a fucking good movie.
And that movie is about PTSD, and it's about people that do violence professionally and them contending with the reality of life, and they do it in this very sci-fi horror body. I mean, obviously it's Cronenberg, son of Cronenberg, but Cronenberg no less. And it's fucking wild how fucked up that movie is, how graphic that movie is, how uncomfortable that movie is. And just, it's so good. It's so surreal and bizarre. The sound design, the makeup effects, the acting, it fires on all levels. And it's not, I think a lot of people would not necessarily categorize that as a horror movie, but to me it is horrifying. And it is scary and jarring. And just, it's a wild ride, but it's also very heady, and it has a very important message. And I think that it's one of the best films that I've seen in the past like 5 years.
Perfect for the midnight showing. Lucas, what are we bringing?
Okay, so I'm torn between 2 very different movies, but I want to leave this maybe to Dusty, maybe to the audience. First of all, 1970s Japanese flick called House. Obayashi's House.
You have my vote already.
It is one of those movies that like the first 30 minutes, you're like, oh, this is wacky and wild.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, it is straight up Evil Dead. And it's such a bizarre movie. And then you learn that not only is Obayashi, he was a young man at the end of World War II in Japan, so he saw some really fucking bizarre things, but he was also an ad guy. He did ad photography and ad films, so his style looks like a 1970s Japanese cigarette ad. It is unfucking believable. It's such a good movie, and very few people have watched it for some reason. The other movie I would recommend is one I watched for the first time at literally October 1st of this year. It's a Senegalese movie. It's on Shudder, called Saloum, and it follows 3 Senegalese mercenaries trying to escape a job that they did, and they have to cut across out of Guinea-Bissau through Senegal out of the country. And it confronts like indigenous folk horror-y type stuff, but it also gets into the phenomenon of child soldiers in the more war-torn parts of the continent. It's edgy and stylish and beautiful. And for the first 20 minutes, you're like, who the fuck are these characters? They feel like almost bad stock action film characters. But then as the movie goes on, you're getting very deeply emotionally attached to mercenaries. It's a very interesting film. One of the reasons I love film from outside the Anglophone world is that the metaphysic is so different, right? I mean, a movie like the Ju-on, The Grudge from Japan, is metaphysically so fucking weird. Or when you get into Southeast Asia, the local mythos is very strange by our standards. So either House or Saloum are they're just fucking nightmares, and they're so cool. So smack that either on the front of or on the tail end of Possessor, which, given its Cronenberg thing, something about the phrase tail end really upsets me. Slapping those 2 movies together would either be the best double feature of your life or the worst bummer you've ever had.
Well, it would be Friday night at midnight, so I've paid my ticket price.
Yeah, buy the ticket and take the ride, indeed.
So now I have to check out Saloum, because I've seen House, but that sounds awesome.
Dude, check it out and get back to me on Discord, and we will chat about it, because I really, again, it is very actiony, but it's a lot of fun. So I recommend it highly. We're going to wrap it here. Dusty Gannon, Goth Dad himself. My God, man. Geez.
No, thank you there, baby bats. Thank you.
I was trying not to put you on the spot with that. You didn't have to.
I mean, it's funny because I don't really do a lot of goth dad shtick anymore, because it's just like, I'm never going to be like, oh, hi there, baby bats. Let's talk about Palestine. Like, I don't want to,
sure.
That takes away. And I don't ever want to make levity of something that I, from an educated, experienced person, am constantly talking about lately. Yeah. But I still like it, and I still love doing the shtick, because it really pisses off stupid, really curmudgeon-y goths that are like, no, he's so cringe. I'm like, that's the fucking point, you moron. It's Goth Dad. Your dad. He is a cringe guy. He tells shitty jokes.
Listen, if Fred Durst can write a song called Dad Vibes, I feel like Goth Dad is okay.
Exactly that.
Yeah, I really enjoy seeing it's a lot of it's on goth subreddits, just this massive amount of time and energy that people spend wasting on hating on this fucking TikTok character that I do that's for fun and is hokey on purpose, and they're like, oh, it's so cringe, it's so stupid. I'm like, you guys are just keep my name in your mouth, I guess. I mean, you're just helping me. I don't know. But yeah, no, I it's never I'm never no, I won't be Goth Dad today. Because people just call me that all the time now. And I'm just like, all right. I was at a punk show the other night in downtown Athens with Scarlett. And we were the oldest people by 15 years. And we walked out, and this kid in a battle vest. And I mean, he was a metalhead. He's like, hey, Goth Dad, what's up? And I was like, hey, I mean, it's okay, cool.
You ever wonder, what is this life I live? You ever have that thought sometimes?
Oh, every day, every single day. I am 2 years and some change ago, I was putting out fires and plugging gunshot wounds in Metro Atlanta. And now I put on makeup almost every night of the week and make silly videos. But I also tour the world, and I get to play on the same festival as Metallica and fucking You know,
You
just
win.
do cool shit. You know?
You win.
Yeah, it's all right. Like, it's okay. You know, it's like, that's the thing that people don't realize is like, if you want to be an artist of any kind, not just musician, but any kind, you're going to do some dumb shit that you don't like necessarily, not even it's called got that like dumb shit, but like you're going to do a number of dumb things. You're like, this kind of sucks. Okay. Play the game because you have to like survive. You have to like pay your bills. You have to like get the word out about your music or your art or whatever. And it's just, I mean, it's like, you can poo us all you want, but like, I don't see your fucking name like next to Metallica and, you know, like all these other crazy metal bands. Not that I even care. Like, I don't even care about that though. It's like, I don't know. Anyway, I'm just being a hater now.
Well, you know what, man? I find me a time where I haven't at some point said like, yeah, fuck this director. There's actually a whole episode of me saying fuck a director. So I get it. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, and we're all human. Like, and you know, I can be pretty heinous about shit that I don't like. So, you know, I've been trying this thing though, like the past couple years, where if I hear a song that somebody's like, oh, you'll love this, or like whatever, or like watch this movie, and I'm like, when I was younger, I was one of those people. I was like, oh, that's shit, that's fucking terrible. I've been really trying to reprogram that thought, and when it hits my brain and I stop myself, I literally will think, stop, not bad, it's just not for you.
A phrase I've learned to adopt doing this show is hate the cinematic sin, love the cinematic sinner. Like, making movies is fucking hard. I know people involved in film production. It is a shit job. It is just brutal work. But at the same time, like, there are people on that set working their ass off, working twice as hard as me, making not nearly enough money.
Right.
But they're making a film. They're doing way more than I have in that regard. I mean, I cracked the joke about Pascal Logier. He's made 100% more films than I have, despite how much I hate his movies. So, you know, it is what it is. But at the same time, though, having that ability to say, like, listen, I think I hate Tim Burton stuff, man. A lot of his movies just completely leave me cold. But I can't deny the guy's working his ass off, and a lot of people love his work. So I put my feelings on hold there, even though I will never watch Nightmare Before Christmas ever again. So not willingly anyway.
Yeah, I feel you. Well, Hot Topic would be very upset about you saying that. So.
I'm 100% sure they would. That's incredibly sad. So again, on that note, Dusty Gannon, Vision Video, thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate you coming on tonight, and we'll have to have you on again soon sometime if you're interested. Absolutely.
I'm actually, so when we'll talk, like, this is a long thing, but I'm actually writing a horror script. So,
shit.
And I feel like it's genuinely pretty cool. I've like talked to some people about it. I've like told them I've been percolating this idea for about 6 months. And I just started doing some research because it involves Bosnian folklore. Bizarre, but
okay.
It's about war and it's about PTSD but it also involves very literal monsters or a singular literal monster. So yeah, I mean, we could anytime. I'm always down. Obviously, I love talking. Just in general, I talk way too fucking much, but also I just like talking about horror. And I can do it all day, every day. So anytime, just shoot me a line.
Will do, dude. Will do. And that's a wrap on that interview. Thanks again to Dusty Gannon for being such an amazing sport and having such an awesome conversation with us. We're truly grateful that you were able to spend some time with us on the show. Dusty and the entire Vision Video team is the very embodiment of indie. They're doing it all on their own. They are, with the exceptions of few minor parts of their career, completely on their own in the wilderness, trying to put together an amazing show and amazing albums for all of us. Thankfully, they're extremely good at it, and we benefit as a result. But I don't believe for a split second that somehow they're the only ones pulling it off. I know better than that. You know better than that, right? So, if you are doing some goth music, some post-punk album, some heavy metal, some horrorcore rap, some like next level dark ambient shit, maybe it's a horror podcast, maybe you're a novelist, whatever, we don't care. The thing that we do care about is that you should let us know. You can reach us at thefrightlabpodcast@gmail.com. We're also available on Instagram, Facebook, the flaming wreckage of Twitter. We're still there for some fucking reason. We can be contacted just about everywhere. But more importantly, we also have a Discord. Joe Wren, let them know about our Discord.
Discord is where this conversation continues, and you can join our Discord server. The link is in the show notes, discord.thefrightlab.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. You heard Lucas say it. Letterboxd. We want to hear from you. The Fright Lab Podcast at gmail.com. We want to know what you think about horror. We want to know what you think about these spooky songs. And we want the conversation to continue wherever you need it to, because that's what this is about. It's about conversation, and it's about the love of music and the love of horror movies. These things go so well together. We talked about that tonight, and we talk about it every single week. If you are a fan of heavy metal music and heavy metal subjects, you need to check out all the shows we are creating at discussmetal.com. We talk about your favorite bands, my favorite bands, thedammitjanets.com. It's going to be real spooky real soon, I promise.
So, with that in mind, friends, siblings, one and all, we thank you so much for downloading this episode. We thank you so much for going and listening to the newest Vision video album, because I know you guys are going to go do that. With that, we appreciate every single last one of you. Thank you all for downloading. We'll talk to you again very soon. And hey, happy Halloween.